Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
The RSA believes that all should have the freedom and power to turn their ideas into reality. And we are increasingly placing this notion at the heart of everything we are doing at the RSA. This graph shows that something very significant happened around about 1750, 1800. Because what this graph shows is what happened to world GDP per capita. It's a way of measuring, of course, the value of all the things that we produce. And you can see that at some point in the 18th century, our capacity to generate things of value just went through the roof. If you place that in even wider historical context, it's even more amazing. So this is a graph going back millennia based on estimates of what the world was actually producing per person throughout history. And we know what happened at that time, and it happened in this country, of course. It was the Industrial Revolution. In fact, the Industrial Revolution never stopped. Our capacity to generate things of value has just kept on increasing, and it's had huge impact on our lives. So what happened at that point around 1750 to bring about this revolutionary change? No one is completely sure what the conditions were, but what we do know that what that change in conditions allowed was for a very fundamental human characteristic to flourish in a way that it hadn't in the past, and that is creativity. And that's something, of course, that is not specific to any historic period. It's something inherent to us as humans. The capacity to imagine a different world and make that different world happen. And that's what was unleashed at that point. But it still was, in many ways, quite an elite revolution for most of the period of the last 200, 250 years. It's been a revolution that was led by technicians. Of course, entrepreneurs have been at the heart of it, a select group of people, sort of heroic business types who spot an opportunity and transform the business environment. Investors, of course, have played an enormous part, and even politicians have played their part, or tried to play their part, in this huge flourishing of creativity and greater capacity to generate value. And that's what brings us to Lee Felsenstein. Lee was a computer engineer in the 1960s, and he had a big idea. And his big idea was that this new thing that was at the heart of this long industrial revolution, computing power, shouldn't just belong to corporations. This great computing power, this huge creative resource, actually should be available to everyone. And he ultimately became the convener of this group of people, which is the Homebrew Computer Club, which was operating in the mid-1970s and was this rather chaotic group of people who shared Lee's vision. Maybe most importantly, though, the Homebrew Computer Club is where this computer genius, Steve Wozniak, was inspired to pursue the idea of developing home computing. He ultimately met this guy, Steve Jobs, who was by no means a computing genius, but was certainly a business genius. And they together produced this, the Apple II, the first breakthrough computer which began to appear in people's homes and schools and offices. And we know what the result of that is. In the last 40 years or so, it has been a complete transformation in the way we go about being creative. Through things like, obviously, the internet, iPhones, Twitter, email, etc. People now publish online. They publish songs, they publish articles, they publish books, they even publish sentences through Twitter. in ways we couldn't have even imagined 5 or so years ago. Consumers are now getting involved in designing their own products, of course, in ways that are completely transformational to all sorts of markets. And we know that over the next 5 to 10 years, this revolution is coming to areas like manufacturing, energy production, that will be just as disruptive as what has happened in, for example, the music business or the publishing industry. And I think the way we can summarise that is to say that we no longer distribute just the products of creativity across the world's population. We now distribute creativity itself, which is a radical shift in this industrial revolution that's been going on for the last 250 years. No longer is the creation of value a purely elite activity. It's now something we're all directly involved in. So we're calling that the power to create. And the reason we think that is so central, because we think this new technology and the huge appetite there is out there to use that technology makes this vision possible for the first time. And there's great upside to this. First upside is the potential for human fulfillment. And when we are creative, we feel enormously fulfilled. We feel like we have meaning in our lives in a way that very few activities give us the same sense of fulfillment. But there's also, of course, huge economic and social potential. Going back to that graph, if that creativity can be shared much more widely, then who knows where that graph will go over the next 50, 100, 200 years. But we also know there are some serious blockages to the operation of this power to create. Public services, crucial part of our economy, we know are often very resistant to the sort of mass creativity that's happening in other areas. But equally in the private sector, there are sectors of our economy that are dominated by large businesses with rather old-fashioned business models which they seem to find it very difficult to break away from, and which smaller, more innovative players, more creative players drawing on mass creativity find it hard to break into in any significant way.